with that, we are ready for our last talk of the day. And for that, I want to welcome these four amazing people. So we're going to talk about managing DAOs at scale. And this is going to be from the perspective of managing anywhere from decentralized foundations to grant programs. So we have Julia from Orca Protocol, Larry from Compound Grants. We have Corbin from Aave Grants and Eva Beylin from the Graph Foundation. They're going to cover all things DAO, anything from on-chain to off-chain to legal to complaints to tooling. And it's going to be a really fun talk and discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome all of them here and get us started. Welcome, everybody.
Hey. Hello.
Thanks for having us.
I'm so excited for this panel. Let's talk all things DAOs. I know everyone here wears many different hats, so I kind of wanted to give everyone the opportunity to just give a quick intro and talk about all the things they have their hands on in the crypto space. Larry, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Larry. I'm the co-founder of Reverie and also the program lead for Compound Grants. And, you know, quick background on myself and Reverie. I mean, I was a VC for 3 years. And we started Reverie because it was me and my co-founder. He was also a former VC. And, you know, we just thought DAOs are really cool. And we thought DAOs could be trillion-dollar organizations, but it wasn't enough for us to just say that. Sort of had to roll up our sleeves and work for them. And so one of the first things we did is we left our jobs and started working for DAOs. And, you know, we did things like Compound Grants and a bunch of other cool things. And that's what we do. We invest in DAOs and we work for them too.
Amazing. Eva?
My name's Eva, director of the Graph Foundation. I was part of the initial team that launched the Graph Protocol. We're currently, exploring how to transition to a DAO. But prior to that, I worked very closely with Moloch DAO and even DAO House. So have been around the DAO space for some time.
Thank you. Corbin?
Hi, everybody. So I'm Corbin. I am currently at Consensus, where I help lead product for all of our fintech products. And then I also spend a lot of time with the Aave community, mostly with the Aave Grants DAO. So we've deployed, I think it's over $1 million at this point to various projects that help kind of grow the ecosystem. And it's just been like a great learning experience to see how a DAO can be as impactful as like a major software company, right? Like this is a totally new type of organization. Like we're trying to figure out how to make this work from the ground up. So excited to share learnings and jam with you folks on a good Friday afternoon.
Amazing. I think it's so interesting that all of you kind of sit in different parts of the DAO ecosystem. Like Corbin, you're in the grants ecosystem. Eva, you're helping transition the Graph into a DAO. Larry, you help provide services to DAOs. I guess like what are just sort of the biggest pain points you guys see as you help grow these DAO ecosystems?
I can go ahead. So something that we're seeing just starting from a foundation that gives grants and sort of has these external contributors. So in a sense, emulating a DAO, but in a centralized format, is figuring out how to scale the real life aspects of jobs that people actually need from DAOs as well. So something like knowing that you're going to have a full-time job, not because like the DAO is going to not vote you in again next quarter, but because like you can maybe continue working as long as you're not fired from the DAO perhaps. And thinking through like, what are those tools that need to exist that like aren't a technology problem, it's like people's safety problem for them committing to whether it's a protocol or a DAO community, but long-term, so they're not just like a short-term contributor.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's like, it's always a human thing, or even like little things like, if you're starting at a new company, right, you're going to probably discuss your offer, how much money you're going to get with what, like an HR person, your private boss, and then the DAO setting, it's all public. That's kind of awkward, right? It's just a weird sort of thing to do, to discuss your salary in a public forum that anyone can see, and then potentially someone's going to tweet about, and then everyone just knows your salary, which is awkward. And so just dealing with those sort of things is super necessary. And, with Compound Grants, when we started it, right, we didn't really think this through. We didn't know that's going to be an awkward sort of thing. And so the way it ended up working out, though, is in private, we sort of had to discuss with the grantees, hey, how much do you want to get paid? You know, what's the hourly rate? That sort of thing. And then in public, we would say what the final sum was, but not, you know, all those sort of details. And that really just makes it more comfortable for people to join, which hopefully lowers their barriers to entry and gets more people working for DAOs. But it's always a human thing.
Yeah, I would second that. I think it's absolutely fascinating because like we're basically reinventing organizations from first principles, right? Like everybody says the same thing about DeFi, right? We're looking at the financial system, we're looking at like what it's providing from first principles and rebuilding it with the internet on chain. We're doing the same thing with corporations, foundations, nonprofits, with DAOs, right? All those types of coordinating bodies for humans are being reinvented now that we have the internet and these like awesome types of tools. And so like that is a very messy process. Like we're figuring out what's working, what's not working. Like these folks said, like what should be public, what should be totally public, what should be private because it's more of a human matter, right? And then at the same time, the tools to do these things aren't purpose built for DAOs, right? Like Chris Dixon had this great post the other day that we're in the kind of like skeuomorphism phase of Web3, and we're applying traditional structures to this new movement, right? We're talking about DAOs as if they're a software company, right? But they're very, very different than a software company, right? There is no like W-2, right? So like all this DAO tooling that folks are working on, like we're using kind of the framework of things that we know from the traditional world, but DAOs might end up operating totally different. And so now we're using that as a reference. We're trying to make it work here. And then we're also constantly evolving it. So, you know, even things like signing transactions, coordinating people, figuring out salaries, all that type of stuff is going to need to be reinvented. And that just takes a lot of iterations and it's going to be messy in some cases.
Yeah, I think that a big issue we see is like the definition of a DAO and what that thing is all like constantly evolving. I'm kind of hearing that's what you're saying, Corbin, is like, you know, we don't actually even know what this thing is yet. How can we be applying old tools, but also we still do need to be applying those tools to it. So I guess also just like to take a step back, like, why do we even care about DAOs? Like, why is this so important for us to be working on and helping develop these tools?
You know, I was like a year ago, I was chatting with the founder of a company I was an investor in, asking for the cap table. And then I opened the cap table and there's like 4 people there. It's myself, 3 other guys and him. And this guy has like hundreds of employees. So I thought it was weird. And so I hit him up and I'm like, hey, all right, why are you so greedy with your employees? It's kind of weird. Like they should get some upside. And he tells me, and I should note, this guy, he's in Southeast Asia. And he tells me, in our country, employees don't want equity, right? The idea that, hey, I can work for a startup and make a bunch of money on this piece of paper is not a really fully formed idea in many countries, right? And we're super lucky in the US where there's fully formed startup markets, and parts of Europe have that too, but most of the world does not. And I think with DAOs, right, we literally have that on a global basis where people all over the world could get ownership in this network and, if potentially make a lot of money and have, life-changing wealth through really contributing to the world through really cool products that make the world better. And so if there's one thing that gets me excited about DAOs, it's that globalization of wealth and these opportunities that mostly folks could read about on TechCrunch and stuff, but never experience for themselves.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think in terms of like the accessibility, right? Like you're seeing the exact same trends in crypto kind of apply to organizations with DAOs, right? So accessibility, like literally for the Aave Grants DAO, we're spinning up like a developers DAO as part of the Grants DAO. And so they're going to help contribute functionality to the core protocol, working with the Genesis team, spinning up, improvements, parameter tweaks, adding new assets, that type of thing. And I was hoping to do some of those interviews, and like I hop on Zoom one day and it's like an 18-year-old dude from Nigeria who just like is a smart contract whiz, right? And I was like looking at his GitHub repo beforehand. I'm like, holy shit, this guy ships, right? Like this guy knows his shit. And like I never would have talked to that individual, if we were running a corporation, in the United States. Like you just don't have access to that talent pool, or maybe he would have been too intimidated to apply. And so it's like that open door is where I see a lot of the benefit of DAOs. Just like in DeFi, one of the benefits is that you have a global audience on day one that anybody can start contributing to, right? The same kind of like ethos is instilled in DAOs.
Yeah, I echo everything Corbin and Larry said, and I would add, DAOs let us coordinate almost around a mission, something larger than just an entity. Whereas like a private company, the only people who care about what the private company does are like the shareholders, the people that work there. In a protocol, you can have literally hundreds of companies full-time aligned to that protocol, and a DAO can be that framework to coordinate them in a way that aligns them to something larger than just their own private interests.
Yeah, I think that I agree with all those things as well. I do think that sort of the ideals of a DAO are very different than the reality of today, which I think we can all sort of agree on. So like Corbin, to your point, do we actually think that DAOs are accessible today?
Yeah, that depends on who you ask. I feel like I know other developers who feel like, they're sharp developers and then they haven't been able to get into any of the DAOs they've been interested in because like maybe it feels a little bit more cliquey, right? Again, all organizations are different shapes, different sizes, and have different gateways. And so I think yes and no. Frankly, if I could wave a magic wand, I think we need to unbundle this term DAO, because like a DeFi protocol DAO has very different needs, users, accessibility than like a DAO spun up to invest in NFTs, or a DAO that emerged around your favorite podcast, right? We're calling all of these things DAOs, but they all are very different types of organizations. They do have certain things in common, right? Like we try to be internet native, we try to like have code as law, and there are certain principles that flow through them all, but they're very different organizations. And so like even the term DAO could, means 10 different things to 10 different people.
I agree with that. I'd also say that DAOs ultimately are just communities, and the DAO's kind of supporting that community. So if someone's struggling to enter DAOs because that community might have high barriers to entry, and a lot of the coordination even between people is currently still off chain. It's, maybe Discord or a forum. So there's like some real like regular social improvements that can be done just to even improve DAO engagement.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, I'm sure everyone sees those funny tweets like, is a group of friends paying for dinner a DAO, right? Or is like a group project a DAO? And it's like, well, we don't really know what a DAO is, but we know what a DAO is not, right? And that sort of gets us halfway there. But I think over time, this sort of stuff, 20 years from now, we won't probably be arguing about what's a DAO. We'll figure it out. It's like one of these growing pains that we all have to deal with in an emerging industry.
Yep. I think this is an issue that continues to come up, is like, what is the DAO? What is it? But how do we sort of like create standards and move sort of processes and tools forward if we don't have a succinct definition around this thing?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that one. I think we were actually chatting about this before we hopped on. Like ideally the tools get configured around like the needs and goals and operating processes of the organization. Actually, we just had the Zodiac kind of demo before this panel, and like I'm a big fan of their approach, right? Because security is the top concern, built on top of Gnosis Safe, which is very much battle tested. But then you have kind of like an open ecosystem of plugins that you can attach to that, right? Mm-hmm. Capital is kind of like the lifeblood of any organization. And then so having very different rules for modifying how that operation actually runs, and having that as an open system that anybody can kind of like, use what's there and it's what has worked for DAOs in the past, or build your own if you need something that's more tailor-made. And so I think the platforms that are going to win, the platforms that are going to like own B2D or D2D commerce are going to be the ones that are configurable to make sure that the tools work well for the type of organization that needs to use them.
Well said. Sorry, Eva, do you have any thoughts on that?
I generally agree. Like in practice, I'd say maybe the Yearn ecosystem has really figured that out. Like there's a tool called Coordinape that was literally created out of the DAO's need and is now the most used way of coordinating sort of rewards and acknowledging the actual contributions within the DAO. And I don't know if Coordinape is actually the best tool for every DAO, right? It kind of just worked for the Yearn ecosystem because of the way they kind of spun out. But I echo Corbin's sort of sentiment that, it'll be, even, I suppose, even if you're using the same DAO framework, the DAOs you create might be completely different. Like I would say, like the original Moloch DAO is very different. That was supposed to be simply funding ETH2 is very different than like Metacartel Ventures that now is a full venture fund. It even has like these off-chain connections to enable like the actual participants to have ownership over the DAO. And so even when you take the same smart contract, the actual execution might be completely different. It might require different tools.
Awesome. I want to talk about grants programs. I know you all sit on grants programs in different ways. So sort of why are grants programs an essential part of DAO ecosystems today? And why are we seeing so much development around them right now?
I can start on this one. I think a lot of people are like so confused about grants programs. It's like, why do they exist, right? And maybe illustrating the example for Compound could be useful. But when we started Compound Grants, which was, I guess, early this year, and maybe February, March, prior to that, if you were in the Discord or if you were, just an active comp token holder and you're really just interested in contributing and you needed money, right, to either quit your job or have some sort of financial motivation to do the work, right? You shouldn't be working for free. You basically had to write a proposal in the forums, lobby people to pay you money publicly, and then wait for this weird governance process that could, basically take 7 days for you to get paid out, right? And that is a crazy barrier to entry to get like $25,000 to do a little project, right? And so with grants, the idea was, hey, let's create a pretty centralized organization, which is called the multi-sig, that basically creates a process for people to get paid super quickly, right? And that was the idea. And the longer term motivation is, well, hey, there's maybe 1,000 or 2,000 or however many people in the community that are active. And maybe some subset of them could actually be full-time contributors one day, but we just don't know which ones they are. So what if we provide grants to a lot of them, see who is capable and who actually delivers on what they say they deliver, and do that for a period of maybe 6 to 9 months. And if that experiment is successful, by the end of it, we'll know, okay, well, this person, they asked for $25,000. They shipped like $150,000 worth of code. These guys are fucking killers. Maybe we should hire them full time, right? And that's funded by grants. And so that was sort of the motivation for grants. And it's worked really well so far because it's such a simple thing that makes the user experience for the grantee really enjoyable compared to especially the inverse of that, which is governance.
Yeah, I totally agree. We've also seen like that proven where we've had a number of grantees now become full-time contributors. Either like another team will hire them or they'll get just paid a long enough grant to be full-time. So it's clearly proof that like a grant is a really low key way to start like dipping into a community without proper commitment, because people leaving their full-time jobs, especially in Web 2 to Web 3, is still pretty scary. So grants being like a really good hybrid solution to that.
Yeah, I would jump off that, and I think Eva's going through it right now. I see grants as like a really critical like point in the progressive decentralization process, right? Where you're just saying like, hey, like we obviously could keep this capital closer to our organization, but we're not, because we want to decentralize, right? We want to incentivize contributors. We want to grow our ecosystem. We want to grow our number of integrations, and we want to basically open up like our KPIs to anyone around the world to kind of help us meet, right? Which is a really, really cool thing to do. I also don't necessarily think that, this first wave of DeFi grant experiments has gone far enough, right? I'm very proud of what we've done at Aave Grants. I think we've funded, over 30 projects, built all these kind of cool folks contributing to the ecosystem, but like, it's still like decently hard, right? Like, I think we have 2 tiers. So if it's over 100K, you still have to like make a post on a public forum and we gather Aave community sentiment and maybe it goes through. If it's less than that, then it's like the Aave reviewers that are taking a look at your application, setting up milestones and then payments, right? Maybe we need more than like just 2 tiers, right? Like maybe if it's less than 2K, right? Anybody around the world can just like point to evidence that they did something, like had a thoughtful take on risk analysis for the protocol, or went ahead and built out the integration, and now I'm retroactively applying for a grant to get compensated for doing so, right? So I think, again, like we took grants from like the traditional world model of like, we have a bunch of capital, we want to grow the ecosystem, all right, grants. I think we can now take it a little bit further and say, like, with crypto, we can do all these programmatic things that we couldn't do before. So what does a grant actually mean now? Maybe we need a whole bunch of other experiments and different tiers to continue to get other people involved. But that said, I think it's been relatively successful with what you pointed out with part-time work. Like half of our grants come from people that are holding down a full-time job. And it is like the best gateway drug in the world to get people moving crypto into Web3 is through grants, because they're like, oh my gosh, now I have crazy upside to this protocol. Like people love me here. They're posting memes about me. People are excited to use my tool. And so like, I think it's another great gateway for getting talent into the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Corbin. And I think what I've noticed is like, there's a really interesting activity happening in sort of this siloed grants, like sort of this part of the ecosystem and like these grant programs. I think Aave is a great example of what you're working on at Aave Grants, and like seeing the amount of subcommittees that are forming underneath Aave Grants and seeing where there's activity and like, okay, how can we provide resources to those, little nucleuses of groups. Can you speak a little more specifically to like some of the initiatives that you guys are spinning out?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two key ones are really the developers DAO and then the risk DAO, right? Like in terms of a DAO that's going to be governing like a major DeFi protocol, right? Like lending credit, like the total addressable market of something like that is absolutely massive if you look 5 years out, right? So like, what is the specialized knowledge that you want to cultivate internally to manage that growth, to manage that as it scales? The first one everybody turns to, because we're all nerds, is developers, right? Like we need more software. Coders are going to solve the world. We're going to automate everything away. And so we've started off with this developers DAO. And if anybody on this call is a developer and wants to get involved, please apply, aavegrants.org. We basically are going to take off some of the load from the Genesis team, right? And this is core protocol functionality. This is tier 1 stuff. But we're going to start opening it up to anybody that has Solidity or scripting or JavaScript skills around the world. So we're really excited about that one. And then the second key one is risk, right? We all know that monitoring the risk of these systems is so important, especially as crypto assets continue to be volatile. We have like crazy up, crazy down days, every couple months. We got to be able to like react to that, and we need a lot of thoughtful, very, very, very specialized expertise around risk. And so I believe we have a risk DAO that's spinning up too, to make sure that the protocol can scale and meet all its goals.
That's amazing. I think it's interesting because like, I think every DAO is trying to get developers and community managers. I think those are probably like the two most in demand kind of professionals right now. But what makes like getting just a small grant from one of these programs a compelling offer for these extremely in demand users or these extremely in demand professionals?
I could maybe chime in here. In my experience, the grantee archetypes, right? There's several core archetypes, and everyone's basically trying to get something different out of a DAO, right? Out of a grant. Sometimes there's a company that maybe has a good idea. It's pre-venture funding, right? But it's a company, it's formed, and the people are like, well, it'd be awesome to get some non-dilutive capital, build something for the DAO, and just kind of work together and see how we're vibing, right? That is a clear use case for that archetype. It's a clear use case for the DAO. It's like a group of folks working on something. Cool, great. Let's give you some money. And so that's definitely a huge bonus for people in that position. There's people who are like, I'm not sure if I'm a good dev, and I just want to try something out, and I want to test my skills, right? And it's like you're getting paid to improve your skills. That's great, right? Like, why would you not do that? And by the way, a lot of these grants programs, they promote you on Twitter, right? So if we give you a grant at Compound Grants, we'll promote the heck out of you. And we want you to find a cool job, of course, at Compound protocol after. But if you want to go somewhere else, we want to promote you too. And we'll actually, you know, give you opportunities to get a gig elsewhere. So a lot of it is, a lot of people just want to break into the industry and they want to, you know, improve their chops a little bit by working on something. And then there's just people who are just, you know, they're really good at what they do. They don't like having a boss, and they're like, I could work for like 6-7 DAOs, basically as a contractor, do really good work, get paid a bunch of money, and do that. And I am a nomad, and it's a good lifestyle for a lot of people too. And those people are really good professionals. And there's, you know, all sorts of sort of archetypes in between, but those are, I would say, the most common ones I've seen.
Yeah, I'd agree. Anecdotally, it's been mostly individuals, contractor types. Although I predict that we're going to see a lot more entities. So we definitely have like a lot of grantees that are like dev shops that are doing something, you know, maybe building out a product. But I foresee us doing a lot more like DAO nesting in the future, where maybe it's like, you know, a security DAO, you know, has, you know, received a grant from the mother DAO, and maybe that security DAO is then like 5 security teams working for this protocol. And so it might not, you know, in the future be even individual, kind of like Larry said, archetypes. Like we might see a DAO that represents every single archetype, just because that's the service that's needed at that time.
Yeah, I would say Larry covered the archetypes like really, really well. I have nothing to add there. What I would say is like, I think the space needs to evolve also beyond just developers, right? Like at the end of the day, like community is everything behind these things. If folks have like energy and some amount of talent, or at least accountable for certain things, like we can probably figure out a pretty good job for you. Just I don't think anyone's like scoped out what that job means for like, you know, a 22-year-old, you know, communications major that just graduated, right? Like we could probably find something useful for them to do. It just hasn't popped up yet. So devs and community managers are definitely like towards the top of the priority list. But I also think we need to like think about what roles are important. And you're seeing this flush out on like very active Discord servers a little bit, but like there are like curator roles, or like, you know, I don't know, hall monitors, some type of role that like you don't need like crazy dev skills versus management skills, or like security auditing type skills to do. And I'm not sure, I haven't seen a ton of great experiments there yet, but I think they'll come.
Yeah, I think Corbin brings up a good point, which is like, I'm not going to name any names, but I've seen DAOs where it's like, you know, hey, anyone can come in, get some free money, right? Let's go. And there's really no focus on scoping the roles. And you see the forums and the work product, and it's all kind of disorienting. It's really just confusing. It's a cluster, right? And, you know, that's not to say something of value won't get created there. But man, if you are a focused person, or if you're an ambitious person and you're like, I know what I want to build, just give me the resources, you're not going to want to work there, right? And so I think scoping, hey, here are the roles the DAO needs, right? Here's what we are building towards is necessary. And then every now and then, you know, if you find someone who's too good to ignore, you want to fund them as well, and give them a little bit more of a free rein. But it is a struggle, I think, to scope those roles appropriately in a DAO environment, and we all got to get better at it.
What do you think is like a specific skill set that DAOs aren't attracting now that they need to be? Like I know Corbin mentioned a few, but can you point out specifically what some of those roles might be, Larry?
You know, we had just hired someone at the Radical community, a governance facilitator, and the role was basically inspired by the Maker governance facilitator role. And long story short, I mean, you know, for a more mature DAO, there's going to be many different working groups, just like a company has many different groups. And you basically got to make sure that the dominoes fall in the right order, right? If you have a product and you're shipping a product, maybe you want the engineering team to ship it on by date X, the marketing team to pick it up from there. But you basically have a factory, right, to run. For a complicated product, there's many different working groups, and making sure everything is running on time is the job, I think, of a governance facilitator. So it's almost like a program management role, but you basically need someone there to be lashing those whips. And if people are not delivering on time, right, they got to be, told that, so that everything is running on time. And so I think that is a role I've not seen many DAOs do, but it's so critical and so necessary because it keeps the train running on time.
Yeah, another role I'd add is PMs, technical PMs or product PMs, because most of these proposals or the teams behind these proposals aren't good at doing the proposal writing. Like it might be a really technical engineering team. And so it really goes a long way to have like a really well formatted proposal, like having had, done the proper due diligence for the community, whatever it might be. The concern, or I guess the unsolved problem here, is how do you properly incentivize PMs? So right now, for example, in the Uniswap ecosystem, a lot of the people sponsoring the proposals, are very large uni voting power holders, whether they're delegates or they are uni holders themselves. So that's, one way to align those incentives. But I think there's maybe even a better way to, incorporate PMs as part of the DAO contributor process, and for us to kind of all accept that, DAOs don't eliminate the middleman or kind of the middle management of like shipping products and getting things done. They just allow us to coordinate better.
Amazing. I feel like the general sentiment of those answers comes back a lot to just like the onboarding process of a DAO, which I think we've all sort of identified in this conversation as one of the weaker points of like how we actually, turn engagement and excitement into contribution. How do we sort of like better facilitate that and better facilitate, people who might be interested into actual real valuable work in these ecosystems?
Yeah, I can jump in there first. I think you just, Julia, I think you just described a new role, right? Like this is your first day buddy. Maybe an easy role that anybody in the DAO can take is like new member ushering in education, set up a call, talk through how they want to contribute, why they're interested. Maybe that's a new role. I mean, I know for me personally, and it's my own problem, but like I'll join a Discord and then there's like a whole big list of things I have to go through and I have to interact with a bunch of bots. And then like, maybe I already own their token, but I have to like verify it. I'm just like, oh my, like I just go back to something else, right? And that's bad, right? Like we should do better. I think that this is a tooling problem, like we were discussing earlier. Like we've got to have better tooling that meets the needs of the different type of organization. Like, what if somebody puts my DAO in their bio on Twitter and just like tweets about it all the time? Maybe it's even like thoughtful tweets on like what could be better, what they're working on, how they're contributing. Like they're a new DAO member and like they should be onboarded somehow, right? And so like I don't necessarily think Discord's going to solve it. Maybe some other chat type tool comes out that solves it. But like I think we need to figure out how to make like participation as frictionless as possible, and then people to get feedback like right away, like first tweet, first shout out a conference, whatever, like they get swag, right? They get something, they get an NFT, right? To like create that excitement loop that's like, this is a community I want to be a part of. This is where I want to be.
Corbin, I'd love for you to be my first day buddy at Aave. Where do I apply?
Eva, Larry, do you guys have any thoughts on onboarding?
I hate to say it, but like crypto Twitter, Discords, it really starts with like getting involved in the community, because it's really hard to like be employable if you don't know what's going on in that protocol. That's kind of the unfortunate situation now, is like there still is quite a bit of like education ramp up that needs to occur. So I'd say getting involved in those forums, and that is like public knowledge. I think it's just us like even sharing that these forums exist on the other Web2 platforms. Like we should be talking about, the ETH research forum on LinkedIn. Like there's all these developers on LinkedIn, like craving crypto content and they don't know where to find it. So maybe there's just like more crossover we could be doing between those platforms.
Amazing. A topic I always like to talk about around DAOs is, what does leadership look like in DAOs? I think in this sort of DAO ideal, we talk a lot about decentralized power, control, ownership, all of these things. But there's also been a little bit of pushback on that, and that leaders are important in these DAO ecosystems. What do you guys sort of think about leadership in DAOs?
Maybe, I could speak about my experience here, but this would be more focused on the, you know, the larger DAOs we're part of, right? Which are primarily the DeFi ones. I know we sort of discussed about what really is a DAO, but I'm talking about maybe some of the larger ones, not some of the social token ones. But, you know, the way I think of this stuff is, you know, there's formal governance power and leadership power, which is like, I own 10% of the company, or I'm on the board of the company, or on the multi-sig. And then there's the informal, which is, you know, that we're all a group of individuals at the end of the day, and there's a social hierarchy, right? And some people have more command and control, and some people have less, right? And none of this stuff is ever documented, but, you know, if you go to the forums and you see the founder posting, they may not hold more tokens than everyone else combined, but they definitely hold a lot of social credibility. And that credibility is used for governance power. You see a lot of this sort of stuff with traditional companies where maybe the founder left or has no formal position, but whenever there's, you know, the CEO saying something and the founder comes in and says, hey, I disagree, people generally look at the founder for control and governance. And so I think a lot of this stuff is tricky, right? And at the same time, though, a lot of it from the traditional world kind of maps over, because we are just groups of people coordinating around projects, and groups of people always have some sort of informal ties with each other. And that sort of tie is the governance power. But I think generally, though, it's good practice for a young early stage project for the founder or the founding team to use that informal power to sort of shepherd the community towards a certain vision. And that's the easiest way to just coordinate a group of individuals to build something special. But curious what everyone else in this panel thinks too.
I'm curious too, because like I think what we've seen in a most recent experiment in Loot was the sort of leader of that ecosystem realized his soft power in the ecosystem, and that was actually taking away from the potential vision of the group. So I'm curious, Corbin, Eva, if you guys have any more thoughts on leadership.
Yeah, I'd say that just, you know, in productivity, regardless of like a DAO or whatever it is, like there usually is a team. Like at 3 people, there's always a leader even there. So like, I think there's always going to be these micro leaders, maybe for specific objectives, maybe for a specific grant or team. And then we don't necessarily need some kind of overarching leader, because the point of these protocols is that they're actually so multifaceted that like we need everyone's domain expertise. Like you're not supposed to have one centralized entity that is controlling it. You know, on the counter example, or maybe proving it, this example is, so Kane, you know, he was on the Spartan Council, left, and then was asked to come back. And so, you know, he has been a leader this whole time, but, you know, just because he was a leader doesn't mean he was then, you know, an autocrat or some kind of like centralized figure, simply that he was good at leading specific initiatives and the community respected that. So I think that that's possible.
Yeah, I would piggyback off that and just say, you know, the leadership also evolves with how the DAO, you know, matures, right? So like take a DeFi DAO, right? They're going to be going through a progressive decentralization process, right? Ideally, you know, the founding team or the founder like should, you know, be ceding control over time as it's, you know, appropriate to more people in the organization, right? And that's what's interesting, is that's what success looks like for DAOs versus it's generally not what success looks like in traditional tech startups, right? It's like, oh, we want to be founder led, you know, through the IPO and all that type of thing. So Kane's a great example. Maki from Sushi. I think there are a couple others that are like that benevolent leader, which like Vitalik is the archetype, I think, of like the benevolent leader, who's like, yeah, I will take a step back, you know, once the organization can kind of run on its own. That said, I think it's an art more than a science, right? Like you got to know where, you know, when to weigh in, when not to weigh in. Like I think the Uniswap, you know, core team has had to make that decision at some points with different proposals that have come through. So yeah, I just think we're seeing it evolve. The last thing I would say is like, I like to think that DAOs promote a meritocratic type like system a little bit more than traditional organizations, right? Like you might have a non-users, or pretty much everything is, you know, like has a time step online, whether it's chat or your actual like PRs, like everything is recorded with these organizations online. And so it's like, it's very clear, like who's doing the work and who's doing like a lot of the thought leadership, and like whatever politicking still exists. I like to think that it's less so than like a traditional corporate structure where it's like drinks after work, you know, get you the promotion. So, you know, it's an art more than a science. It's still evolving, but I like to think that DAOs are a little bit more flat and fair than what came before them.
Yeah, I think on the other end of the spectrum too, like we're talking about extremely good, productive contributors in these ecosystems. What happens when we have bad actors in these ecosystems? Like, how do you handle bad actors in DAOs that are potentially creating problems?
That's a tough question. I guess one way that we've sort of tried to manage quality at the foundation is not paying out the full grant upfront. So we'll do 20% upfront, the rest of the 80% upon completion. And that kind of weeds out anyone who didn't want to work. And you do kind of pay a small cost, perhaps, but they also take on like a reputational cost, like they're a team maybe we won't work with again or won't recommend. Similarly, you know, like we saw today with Robert Leshner, you know, there's ways to sort of like intrinsically and reputationally, you know, bring someone to be more altruistic than they otherwise were that, you know, are also part of the incentive formula, but just aren't simply like a DAO grant that is incentivizing that good behavior. So I think there's like a lot of social ways to manipulate perhaps a bad DAO actor on chain to be better off chain.
Yeah, you know, certainly milestones, like Ava mentioned, work really well. But then, you know, to double click on that like social point, I mean, I think it's like a little like company culture, right? Where some companies have this like vicious culture, and if you're a dick, right, people allow you to do that, right? Versus some other companies, if you're being a prick, you know, they fire you, you're gone, right? And I think it really does require the DAO to sort of have an informal or even formal social contract. Here's our code of conduct, right? Here's how you behave. If you're commenting in a forum and you're being a dick to people, you know, we're just not going to take you seriously, and the moderator is going to ban you. And it's like little things like that. It feels so obvious, but it's necessary, I think, to set up for a DAO context.
Yeah, the last thing I would say is, you know, I'm not saying that a token always makes sense, but a great thing a token does is it aligns like interests of the token holders, right? So like a bad actor is going to be less likely to be there if, you know, they're working against the goals of the overall group, or they're being disruptive, or they're slowing things down, right? Because like that is the most powerful kind of incentive mechanism that these things have. And then like, if you remember way back in the day, like one of the original innovations for Mullick DAO was like the rage quit, right? Because like if we aren't getting aligned, or if like, you know, if I'm a petulant child that like, you know, we absolutely have to do this and everybody else is going the other way, like I can take my toys and I can go home and I can rage quit. So I think like, again, we're evolving these mechanisms in real time. And, you know, frankly, bad actors is one of those things we're gonna have to figure out.
Sounds fair. Okay, last question of the day. We have to wrap up. But what do you hate about your DAO setup right now? Corbin, we were joking about some pain points you were experiencing before, but what is terrible in your DAO setup right now?
Yeah, I think, Julia, we're going to go over now because I'm just going to start listing things. Multi-sig signing is the worst ever. Oh my gosh. Like a bunch of Telegram pings, and like first thing I do when I wake up in the morning, I like log on and see what's up. It's like, oh my God, I got to sign 8 transactions. Like there goes like 30 minutes of my day. Like we just got to figure out maybe a better coordination mechanism, or maybe it's a UX problem. And like, we should experiment with ideas like assumed signature if you haven't vetoed within a 48-hour period or something like that. Like, I think there are all types of things that like multi-sig of like, you know, 7 of 9 is probably not the end game of the space here. So I think that's one easy one. Governance actually gets a lot of attention, right? So I think that problem is on its way to being solved, right? Like how do we coordinate better and actually have thoughtful discourse on a proposal and get it voted through? But it's also still a shit show today, right? Like Boardroom and Tally do a decent job, Snapshot, but like we also see proposals get to a far stage without like core people paying attention because there's just so much stuff going on, right? So like thoughtful thinking about governance and voting on it and having like really good solid delegates is something that needs to continue to improve. You know, capital allocation, treasury management, all those things need to improve. How we explain this stuff to normies is another great one, right? Like anytime you say, oh, I contribute to a DAO, they're like, the DAO, like that big hack, like, oh, I remember that. It's like, no, it's not that. But like, DAOs are still around. They're actually like pretty cool. You should contribute. If these things do go mainstream, probably around social tokens or streaming, right? About these like organizations around like content creators is kind of how I think they'll go mainstream. Like we need better ways of introducing these concepts, these tools, these ways of contributing to normies. So all those things, from the minute, like signing, multi-sigs to like explaining these things to the real world in a way that they'll rock.
Yeah. So Corbin has basically laid out there's no room for improvement in DAOs. Larry, Eva?
I think we should just come up with a new term, like DAO sucks. Like, can you imagine being like in 2044 and still saying DAOs? Like, it sort of feels like saying intraweb in like 2020. It's just, no, you don't say that term. So to Corbin's point, just the marketing, right, of DAOs, I don't think most people intuitively understand what a DAO is when they hear it. And so just trying to simplify the messaging a little bit, I think could go a long way to making DAOs just more accessible to normies.
Maybe one thing I'll add is I don't think we've quite figured out what a DAO like holds as liability in itself versus its participants. And I don't think we've had that many examples to explore this space yet, or like not that many like very large capital inflows or outflows, but there could be a time, where a government regulatory agency or really just people are upset about some behavior that a DAO grant has achieved, right? Maybe it's, funding some malicious behavior, but the DAO didn't realize it was malicious at the time. And then who is liable then? And how do you then protect maybe your DAO members from being the ones to incur pain?
Yeah, really good points that I don't think gets talked enough in these DAO discussions. Well, Eva, Corbin, Larry, thank you so much for this awesome panel.
I think before we end, Julia, what is your answer to that same question?
The lack of accountability in DAO systems. People need to face repercussions for their actions in DAOs.
I wanted to dig more into that, but should have started off with that question.
Well, Julia's like, fire the bad guys, fire them.
We have a force quit function instead of a rage quit. Amazing. Well, Corbin, Eva, Larry, Julia, thank you so much for that amazing chat. Before we end, let's kind of go in order and just quickly say how people can get involved in each of your organizations and DAOs and communities, and how can they find or contact you after. Start off with Corbin.
Great. Yeah, I'm Corb Page on Twitter. Reach out about anything. The biggest things are go to avegrants.org and like apply for a grant. There are a bunch of RFPs on there. There are a bunch of things that we need. So take a look at the list and see if anything speaks to you and apply. Please do. And especially if you're a developer, check out the Developer DAO. We're literally hiring folks like in the very, very near future. And so come contribute and get involved.
Yeah.
Next. So the graph is for non-technical and technical people. So if you are interested in running a node, get involved by being an indexer. If you're just, a front-end full stack developer, you can build a subgraph. If you're just here, interested in the crypto ecosystem, you can be a curator and use your knowledge about apps and earn grantee in the network.
Larry?
For compound grants, you can always go to compoundgrants.org. Always apply to us before Aave though, just saying. And if you just want to message me, I'm at Sukernik at Telegram. You can ping me at any time. I'm joking. You should apply to both Aave and the graph and compound everywhere.
It's not a zero-sum game.
Great.
This is awesome. And Julia, lastly, we'll end off with how people can get in touch with you.
Yes, I didn't get to introduce myself, but I'm co-founder of Orca Protocol. We're building tools for DAOs. Check us out on Twitter and join our Discord. We are gearing up for launch, so lots of exciting updates to come.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And this marks the end of today's summit. Now, we had the Aave Grants DAO Summit yesterday, and the next summit is next Thursday with Compound Grants. So we'll give the same people both opportunities to apply to both. But we'll see you all next week. And in the meantime, for everybody participating at the hackathon, happy hacking, and see you next week. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.